The deep space research convoy had been traveling for so long that the stars outside the windows had begun to feel like familiar neighbors. Every day, the same soft glow of distant suns drifted past the transparent panels, and every night, though night meant little in the endless dark of space, the crew would watch tiny points of light twinkle against the blackness. To them, this quiet, peaceful view had become normal. It was easy to forget how far from home they really were. They were drifting at the edge of a region few people dared to explore, a place where maps were vague and warnings were common. But for the people on these ships, exploration was their purpose. It was what they lived for. Among these vessels was the Arclight, a sleek survey ship painted with the sharp white and blue markings of the Neutral Scientific Network. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't built for battle. It was built for scanning planets, collecting samples, and gathering data. The Arclight carried scientists, engineers, surveyors, and a captain who had earned a quiet kind of respect across the fleet. Her name was Captain Lyra Vance. She was calm, steady, and known for thinking clearly even when others panicked. Her crew trusted her, not because she was strict or loud, but because she always knew what needed to be done. The convoy had been traveling for months, stopping occasionally near unknown planetoids to measure gravity fields, magnetic patterns, and strange particles that floated like invisible dust through the cosmic wilderness. After each survey, they would drift back into formation, recheck their engines, and continue onward. Their mission was simple on paper, but dangerous in reality. Explore an uncharted chain of planetoids near the border of a region that many star nations avoided. Scientists wanted the data. Explorers wanted the discoveries. The fleet's high command wanted answers about the strange signals detected from this part of space. So the convoy was sent 3 research ships to supply vessels, and a handful of small escort ships, meant to offer basic protection. These escorts were not the heart of the Deathworlder fleet. They were scouts, patrol ships with only light weapons and thin armor, but they carried the symbol of humanity's proud military tradition. Humans were known as Deathworlders, a name given by other species who learned over centuries that humans came from a planet considered extremely dangerous. Their bodies were resilient. Their instincts were sharp. Their ships, when fully deployed, were powerful and known for defending civilians with unmatched determination. Even though only a few small escorts traveled with the convoy, the symbol of the Deathworlder fleet still brought a sense of safety. Crew members moved through the Arclight's passageways each day, wearing soft gray uniforms and carrying data pads filled with survey logs. Some worked in labs analyzing soil samples from the last planetoid. Others spent hours in observation rooms, studying sensor readings of the next unexplored world. Life on board was peaceful in a strange way. There were no cities, no open skies, no running water except what flowed through metal pipes and recycled filters. Yet everyone had found their routines: meals in the mess hall, long shifts at control panels, short breaks filled with laughter or tired sighs, and nights lying in narrow beds listening to the gentle hum of engines. Captain Vance often walked the bridge with slow, thoughtful steps, observing every station, every blinking light, every display screen. She had learned long ago that space did not forgive mistakes. A missing number in a navigation chart, a small crack in a coolant tube, a forgotten calibration, these tiny errors could grow into deadly problems. So she paid attention, and her crew mirrored her discipline. They ran checks again and again, making sure their ship remained steady as it crossed the cold frontier. Sometimes, during quiet moments, crew members would talk about the stories they'd heard, tales of raiders, rumors of mysterious signals, warnings passed from trader to trader, stories about ships that entered the region and never returned. But stories were stories, and most of the convoy preferred to focus on their missions rather than fear what might be lurking beyond the scanners. After all, nothing dangerous had happened so far. The stars had been silent. The shadows had been empty. The journey felt almost too calm. Despite the calm, the Arclight's senior staff knew the truth. Peace in deep space was never a guarantee. Space was vast and full of wonders, but it was also lawless in many places. Patrol routes stretched only so far. Alliances between star nations did not always extend into these remote regions. Far from home, even a simple malfunction could turn a mission into a struggle for survival, and raiders groups who preyed on weak, isolated ships were known to haunt the edges of unexplored territory. But the convoy kept moving. Their schedules were strict, the data they gathered was valuable, and each day without trouble made them believe they might finish the mission without incident. When they reached the midpoint of their route, the convoy began preparing for another planetary scan. The lead scientists believed the next planetoid might hold geological patterns similar to those found only in rare ancient worlds. If the readings were correct, they might uncover minerals no one had catalogued before. Excitement grew through the research teams. Even the usually calm Captain Vance felt the quiet hum of anticipation in the air. Before the scheduled scan, the Arclight drifted alongside the rest of the convoy. Crew members tightened solar panels, cleaned long-range sensors, and recalibrated the ship's main antenna. Navigation officers plotted the next few jumps, checking gravitational currents that could affect their path. Everything felt normal. Everything felt routine. No one sensed the danger lurking in the distance. On one long shift, Captain Vance stood at the front of the bridge, her hands behind her back, watching stars pass by the panoramic window. She thought about the mission reports, the calm days ahead, and the hope of finishing this long assignment. She imagined the convoy returning home months later, carrying new discoveries that would excite scientists across several star systems. She imagined her crew celebrating after landing on a safe, familiar station, laughing, stretching, and finally breathing natural air again after so long in recycled oxygen. But deep in space, calm moments could be the most deceptive. While the crew worked, rested, and dreamed of future discoveries, a faint signal passed by the outer edge of one of the escort ships. It was small, so small that the sensor officer didn't even notice it at first. A whisper of movement, a shadow that didn't match the usual drift of cosmic dust, a flicker of energy on the border of detection range. The escort's scanner automatically recorded it, but the signal was too weak to trigger an alert. Hours passed. Another escort detected another faint disruption. This time the shift officer glanced at the reading, raised an eyebrow, and frowned with mild concern. But the signal faded again before any real analysis could begin. The officer shrugged, made a small note in the ship's log, and continued with routine work. No one knew that these faint shadows were not natural disturbances. There were signs of something watching the convoys, something moving silently in the darkness, tracking them from a distance, waiting for a moment when the convoy would be isolated enough to strike. But as far as the Arclight's crew knew, everything remained peaceful while engineers double-checked the engines. Two scientists in the lab were discussing ancient star formations and the thrill of uncovering new minerals. In the mess hall, a group of junior crew members shared stories about their previous missions, both disastrous and hilarious. On the bridge, Vance reviewed the next day's schedule with her navigation officer. Small lights blinked across the holographic map. Each ship in the convoy displayed a soft green glow, showing stable conditions. Everything looked perfect. But perfection in space often meant something was about to go wrong. Late in the ship's artificial night cycle, a young technician named Mara walked quietly through one of the lower corridors, carrying a tray of replacement circuit components. The hallway lights were dim, and the soft rumble of the engines echoed through the metal walls. She liked these moments. The stillness made her feel like the ship was breathing around her, like it was alive in its own way. As she walked, she thought about how lucky she felt to be part of a mission like this. Growing up on a crowded station, she had dreamed of exploring distant places. Now she was here, in the middle of nowhere, helping a ship discover secrets no one else had seen. It felt like a dream. But even Mara sensed something strange, something not quite right. She paused halfway down the corridor and frowned, listening. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a change in the air pressure, a faint tremble beneath her feet. She shook her head, deciding it was just exhaustion playing tricks on her, and kept walking. Above her, on the bridge, Captain Vance was reviewing sensor reports when the faint tremble reached the control room. The vibration was so light that most crew members assumed it was a minor calibration shift in the engines. But Vance's instincts told her something was off. She checked the diagnostics, but everything appeared normal. She stared at the blank space beyond the window, feeling a quiet unease she couldn't explain. Still, she told herself, every long mission had moments like this. Long stretches of silence gave the mind too much room to imagine danger. The days passed like this, quiet, peaceful, almost too smooth. The convoy moved deeper into uncharted territory. The faint shadow signals continued, but no one noticed the pattern forming. No one realized that they were being herded slowly, carefully, into a region where communication grew weaker and rescue became harder. The Arclight remained calm. The convoy remained steady. But far out in the cold dark of space, unseen eyes were watching. And the path ahead was leading them towards something none of them expected. Their safety felt real. Their mission felt stable. Their distance from danger felt comfortable. But they were wrong. Their journey was not as peaceful as it seemed. And they were only a moment away from discovering how quickly quiet stars could turn deadly. The moment the convoy entered the next stretch of space, something in the atmosphere of the mission changed quietly at first, like a tiny drop of cold water sliding down someone's back. No sirens, no bright flashes, no sudden alarms. Just a slow, creeping sense that something around them was not the same as before. But none of the crew could explain it, and no one wanted to be the first to say something that might sound like fear. The faint signals that had brushed the convoy earlier, those tiny flickers on the scanners, began appearing more often, not strong enough to trip a full alarm, but clear enough that several escort ship sensor officers started marking them down with growing concern. Each entry was small, unidentified echo, anomaly, shadow reading. But when these small notes piled up, they started to paint a picture. Something was trailing them, something moving with them, something that never drifted too close, but never fell too far behind. On the Arclight, the research teams were busy preparing for their next planetary scan. They moved through the labs with excitement, gathering equipment and checking settings on their handheld analyzers. But the escort ships were not focused on minerals or data. They were watching the darkness. Their job was to protect the convoy, even if they had little more than light weapons and courage to do so. One morning cycle, The escort ship Vantage detected a strange spike in the readings. The officer on duty leaned forward, squinting at the bright pulse on his screen. It wasn't debris. It wasn't a drifting rock. It wasn't anything normal. It was deliberate. A ship. Or more than one. He quickly ran a verification scan, but the signal vanished just as fast as it appeared. It was like a shadow deciding to hide behind another shadow. He reported it up the chain, but even as he did, he felt uncertain. Without proof, it sounded like a false alarm. Shadows in space were common reflections, dust clouds, old signal echoes from distant stars. But something about this one had felt intentional, as if someone out there wanted the Vantage to know they were being watched, but not too clearly across the convoy. Similar reports began coming in from different escort ships, each one small, each one brief, but all of them pointing to the same unsettling possibility: someone was following them. Captain Lyra Vance received the compiled data on her bridge console. She read it silently, her eyes narrowing with each report. She didn't panic. She didn't shout. She simply stood still, thinking, weighing all possibilities. The convoy had traveled peacefully for months. Their mission was scientific. They carried no valuable trade goods or diplomatic secrets. So who would stalk them? Still, she trusted patterns over assumptions, and this pattern was growing. She ordered her crew to increase long-range scanning sweeps and to maintain a tighter communication schedule with the escort ships. The crew followed orders calmly, but inside, many felt a growing tightness in their chests, a sense of waiting for something, not knowing what, but knowing it wasn't good. As the convoy continued, the strange signals grew stronger. Before, the shadows had appeared once every few hours. Now they flickered almost every 20 minutes. The escorts began to adjust formation, drifting slightly outward to create a protective barrier around the research ships. Their engines hummed louder as they powered secondary shields. They didn't fire any weapons. There was nothing to aim at, but the tension was building. Meanwhile, life inside the ships became strangely quiet. Conversations in the mess hall turned shorter. People stopped laughing as freely. Even the scientists, normally lost in excitement about new discoveries, began to glance nervously at the windows as they worked, as though expecting to see something lurking outside. Space was empty, but it felt less empty now. The darkness felt heavier. The technicians noticed something first: interference. The convoy's communication bands, usually clear and crisp, began crackling with static. Words cut off mid. Messages needed repeating. At first, the crew blamed solar radiation or dust particles, but the interference kept rising, then falling, then rising again, like waves, almost as if someone was testing the frequencies. One engineer in the Arclight's communications room muttered, "Feels like someone is poking the ship," and though the comment was meant as a joke, it made everyone in the room uneasy. Back on the bridge, Captain Vance requested a full diagnostic of the convoy's internal systems. She wanted to rule out technical failure before she considered external threats. But the diagnostics came back clean. All equipment was functioning perfectly, which meant the interference was coming from outside. Someone was jamming them, not fully. Not enough to block communication completely, but just enough to disturb it. Like claws scratching at the edges of a door, waiting for the right moment to break in. The rising challenge continued across the next 2 days. Every hour brought something new: a faint metallic ping on the hall sensors, a mysterious echo mimicking their own signals, a sudden drop in the escort ship's sentinels' shields without explanation. The crew managed to restore them, but they could not determine why they had failed in the first place. Fear began whispering through the convoy, quietly at first, carried through small conversations, then spreading into shared glances and tightened jaws. These were experienced crews, trained for danger, but danger was easier to face when it revealed itself. Hidden danger was different. It crawled under the skin. On the Arclight, a meeting was held among senior officers. They gathered around a circular table, small holograms glowing above it. Vance listened as each officer shared their observations. The navigation officer pointed to shifting gravitational data, something large moving near them every few hours. The communications chief explained how the interference always spiked when the convoy tried to send a long-range message. The escort liaison officer quietly admitted that their light escort fleet could not stand against a large attacker. Vance listened without interruption, her fingers pressed together, thinking carefully. She asked questions. She considered possibilities. She did not allow fear to guide her decisions. But she did not ignore warning signs. They could not stop the mission. They could not leave the convoy vulnerable. Their best option was to remain alert, conserve power, and prepare for any event. But the shadows following them were growing bolder. Later that same cycle, a sudden ripple spread across the convoy's sensors. Not faint this time, not subtle. A strong reading, directly behind them. The escort ships quickly rotated, scanning the area. The ripple vanished again, but this time it left a scar of digital noise behind it. Proof clear and undeniable. It was a ship, a very large ship, and it wasn't alone. The escorts sent urgent telemetry to the Ark. Vance stared at the readings, her jaw tightening slightly. She knew what she was seeing. She had read the report. She had heard the stories whispered among travelers and refugees. Raiders. A spaceborne predator group known for cruelty. They attacked isolated ships, captured crews, stripped vessels for parts, and sold survivors into forced labor. They were ruthless, unpredictable, and feared across several sectors. And now, they had found the convoy. The escorts tightened formation further, forming a moving shield around the research ships. But they were too few, too lightly armed. If the raider fleet attacked, the escorts would struggle to survive, let alone protect the convoy. The raiders didn't immediately attack. Instead, they played a cruel game, circling just out of range, dipping into shadows, disappearing from radar, then appearing again. A psychological hunt. They wanted the convoy to feel fear, to feel small, to feel helpless, and it was working. The scientists stopped their research entirely. Their instruments were still on, but no one looked at them. Crew members gathered in corridors, whispering, waiting for orders. The escort's weapon crews sat in their chairs with trembling hands, trying not to show it. Every person in the convoy felt it now, the pressure of eyes watching them from the dark. Eyes that did not see them as explorers or workers, but as prey. In the central corridors of the Arclight, Mara, the young technician, felt the tension more than ever. She took longer routes between assignments just to pass by windows, hoping to spot something, anything, that would give answers. But all she saw was stars. Beautiful, distant stars. And somewhere out there, hidden in the dark spaces between the constellations, the raiders waited. Captain Vance remained steady, but inside she knew the situation was becoming dire. If the raiders cut communications completely, the convoy would be helpless. The main Deathworlder fleet was too far to respond quickly. Even if the Arclight sent an SOS, the raiders' jamming could easily block it or distort it. And if the raiders chose to attack before backup arrived, the convoy had no chance. Still, abandoning the mission was not an option. Turning back might leave them even more vulnerable. They were stuck in a trap, and the walls were closing in. The interference worsened. At times, it sounded like voices hiding beneath the static, distorted, warped, but unmistakably sent by someone. The raiders were probing their channels, testing their communication defenses, mapping their weaknesses. Then, for the first time, the raiders revealed themselves clearly. A massive silhouette appeared on long-range sensors. Its hull was jagged, patched with stolen armor. Its engines burned a sickly shade of red. Then another ship appeared, and another. 5, then 7, then 9. The convoy was surrounded. The escorts immediately prepared for combat, but they knew it was hopeless. They could not win this fight. Their only hope, thin as it was to survive long enough to send a distress signal through the jamming field. A rising challenge had become a rising terror. The raiders began moving in formation, tightening the circle around the convoy like predators closing in on wounded prey. Their energy signatures pulsed with growing aggression. They wanted the convoy to know the attack was coming. They wanted fear. They wanted panic. But panic would only make the convoy easier to capture. Inside the Arclight, the crew felt the ship grow colder, not physically, but emotionally. Conversations died. Footsteps grew quiet. Every person was waiting for a sound, a flash, a sign that the attack had begun. But the raiders were patient too. Patient, and that patience was worse than any sudden strike. Captain Vance stood at the front of the bridge, her eyes unwavering, her voice calm as she issued orders to her crew. She knew what was coming. She knew the convoy was on the edge of disaster, and she knew she had only one chance to save them. They had to break the jamming field. They had to send an SOS, but doing so would require a dangerous act, one that could cripple the Arclight if anything went wrong. And yet, as the raiders tightened their circle, as the shadows outside grew darker, as fear sharpened in the hearts of everyone aboard, it was their only chance. The moment the raiders completed their circle around the convoy, the air inside every ship seemed to freeze. No one breathed normally. No one spoke above a whisper. It felt as if the entire fleet had stepped onto a thin sheet of ice, and every second brought them closer to the moment it would crack. The shadow of danger was no longer just a feeling, it was real, heavy, and pressing on every person aboard. The Arclight's bridge lights dimmed as Captain Lyra Vance stood before the main display. The screens showed 9 raider ships, huge and sharp-edged, drifting like dark predators. They did not fire a single shot. They did not send a message. They simply followed, keeping perfect pace with the convoy, waiting, studying, deciding the exact moment to strike. The escorts positioned themselves between the research ships and the raiders, but everyone knew it would not be enough. The escorts were brave, but bravery was a small shield against such overwhelming force. Inside the convoy, fear crawled silently from one hallway to another. Scientists who once joked about asteroids and black holes now sat quietly gripping their chairs. Engineers stared at screens with trembling hands, pretending to check readings they had already checked 3 times. Technicians whispered prayers under their breath. Even the seasoned soldiers on the escort ships felt the cold pressure of helplessness. They were trained to fight, but they knew they would only buy a little time, not protection, not victory. Just moments. Those moments were all Captain Vance needed. She knew the convoy's only chance of surviving this was to call for help. but the raiders' jamming field was choking every signal, like a heavy hand pressing down on their communication channels. Normal messages were useless. Standard distress signals would scatter in static before they ever left the area. They needed something stronger that could burn through the interference. Something was dangerous. What's called a transmitter overload, a procedure that banned in most peaceful fleets, unless the situation was truly desperate. It required channeling massive energy through a communication array, pushing it far beyond its safe limits. It could break through jamming, yes, but it could also blow out the transmitter permanently, overload the ship's power grid, and even trigger electrical fires. If the overload went wrong, the Arclight could lose navigation, propulsion, shields, everything. That was like smashing a hammer against ice while standing on the ice yourself. It might save you, or it might break everything. Captain Vance understood that risk, but she also understood a deeper truth. Doing nothing meant certain capture. She turned to her communications officer, a young man named Raylan. His hands were visibly shaking as he worked, but he tried not to show fear. Vance placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We need a narrow-band transmission," she said calmly. "One pulse, strong enough to break through." Raylan swallowed hard. "You know what that could do to the ship?" "Yes," she replied, her eyes steady. "Do it anyway." Elsewhere in the ship, the crew continued to feel the rising pressure of danger. Mara, the young technician from earlier, stood in a hallway holding a toolbox she had forgotten she was carrying. She stared at a small window in the corridor, watching the void outside. Nothing moved, nothing flashed, but the silence felt wrong, like a predator holding its breath before pouncing. She could almost feel eyes on her, not humanized, not friendly ones. She whispered to herself, "Please, someone help us." But help was far away, too far unless the SOS could reach the Deathworlder fleet. On the escort ships, the situation was even worse. The raiders had begun to test them. The first test came as a sudden burst of static that knocked out the Sentinel's forward scanners. The ship flickered with blue sparks, and alarms blew. Engineers rushed to control panels, trying to stop the overload from spreading. They succeeded. But the message was clear. The raiders could cripple them whenever they wanted. The second test came when the raider flagship sent out a low, rumbling signal. It wasn't words. It wasn't any known language. It was just a deep, pulsing vibration that echoed through the escorts' hulls, almost like a growl, a warning, or a taunt. The escorts tightened formation again. Their captains exchanged brief messages, steady voices hiding the fear underneath. They knew they might not survive the first 30 seconds of a full attack, but they would stand their ground because the research ships behind them had no weapons at all. Meanwhile, Raylan worked frantically in the Arclight's communication center. He rerouted currents, bypassed safety locks, and pushed power levels to dangerous heights. Sweat dripped down his forehead. The lights flickered. The hum of the transmitter grew louder to loud level rising. He said, "We're approaching rupture threshold." Captain Vance stood behind him, her eyes fixed on the readings. "Hold it steady. If we go any higher, hold it." The ship vibrated again, this time more violently. Panels rattled. Tools fell from shelves. Somewhere below them, a loud clang sounded as something metal shifted out of place. The overload was straining the entire vessel, but they had no choice. A sudden alarm blared across the arc. A voice came through the intercom. "Urgent, panicked, Captain." Multiple boarding craft detected leaving the raider ships. The moment had come. The raiders were done waiting. Asterisk on the main screen. Dark shapes shot forward from the raider formation like spearheads, fast, deadly, moving directly toward the convoy. The escorts fired warning shots, but the raiders ignored them. Their ships kept advancing in straight, cruel lines. They didn't care about damage. They didn't care about loss. They just wanted to reach the convoy. The rising tension snapped into action. "Raylan," Captain Vance shouted, "send the signal." Raylan slammed his hand on the final switch. The overloaded transmitter roared to life. A bright, painful burst of energy shot through the communication array, bending circuits, straining metal, filling the room with a blinding flash. The lights went out, then came back on, then went out again. A sharp burning smell filled the air. Electrical smoke. Asterisk. The ship shook violently, as if struck by something enormous. Sparks exploded from a nearby console. The emergency lights flickered red. For a moment, no one knew if the signal had worked. For a moment, the only sound was the deep, low hum of a ship in pain. Engine power dropping. Someone yelled, "Navigation offline. Sensors failing. We're dead in the water." Asterisk. The Arclight had lost most of its systems. It drifted helplessly as the raider boarding craft closed in. The escorts scrambled to intercept, firing burst after burst from their light cannons. But for every raider ship they damaged, to more advanced. Asterisk. Inside the Arclight, chaos spread. Crew members stumbled through dark corridors lit only by emergency lamps. Some carried fire suppressants to battle small electrical fires. Others dragged injured colleagues to medbays. Panic spread like wires sparking in the dark. Asterisk. But Captain Vance stayed on her feet. She pushed through smoke-filled hallways, shouting orders, helping crew members up, directing them away from collapsed panels. Her uniform was singed at the sleeve, and her hair was dusted with carbon, but she kept moving. "Bridge to captain," a voice crackled through a damaged speaker. "The raiders are boarding the escorts. We can't hold them." Vance closed her eyes for a brief second, feeling the weight of failure crash into her chest. Had the SOS failed? Was the Deathworlder fleet too far? Were they alone? The boarding craft came closer. So close, their ugly shapes were visible through the window's battle-scarred hulls. Jagged metal, glowing claws used to cut into ships. They latched onto the first escort ship with screeching metal hooks. The escort shook under the impact. Alarm lights flared. The crew inside prepared to fight hand-to-hand, but they were outnumbered. Another raider craft latched onto the second escort, then another, and another. Inside the arclight, Mara clutched a wall panel as the ship shuddered again. She felt tears sting her eyes. She didn't want to die here. Not in the dark. Not alone. Not without a chance to see home again. As the raider boarding craft turned toward the arclight, their claws opening like hungry jaws, everything seemed lost. Then a faint beep echoed through the half-dead communication console. One beep. Then another. Then a third. Rallan blinked, confused, staring at the cracked display. A message was trying to come through, but it wasn't from the raiders. The static shifted, the signal strengthened, and then clear, unmistakable, and powerful a voice cut through the interference. "Deathworlder, Fleet Strike Group responding. Hold position." Rallan's eyes widened. "Captain." Vance froze mid-step. The entire bridge went silent. The SOS had reached them. The SOS had reached them. They were coming, but the raiders had no idea yet. Outside the ship, the raider boarding craft ignited their cutting claws, preparing to slice into the arclight's hull. The escorts were barely holding on. The convoy was moments away from collapse. And then, like thunder breaking a silent sky, a brilliant tear of light appeared in the distance. Then another dot, and another dot. Space rippled. Roared. The Deathworlder fleet arrived with the fury of a storm. The moment the Deathworlder fleet tore through space, it felt as though the darkness itself had split open. 1 second, the raider ships were charging toward the helpless convoy, certain of victory. The next second, the entire battlefield was flooded with blinding light blue, white, gold colors that shimmered like lightning across the void. The fabric of space vibrated under the force of multiple FTL drops, each one roaring like a cosmic storm. Every person in the convoy felt the shockwave. It rattled floors, shook windows, and made hearts jump with sudden hope. For a long moment, no one even understood what had happened. They only saw flashes of power, huge shadows emerging from the rift, towering warships shaped like spears, shields glowing fiercely. Then the cum crackled. A voice spoke. Strong, steady, unmistakably human. "Strike Group Aegis has arrived. All hostile craft, disengage immediately or be destroyed." The raiders did not disengage. They snarled forward, engines roaring, weapons glowing with hungry red light. They had not expected resistance, certainly not a Deathworlder strike group. But raiders were predators, and predators rarely backed down when they thought they had already won. Inside the arclight, Captain Vance stared at the scene unfolding on the holographic display. Her tired eyes widened as ship after ship appeared. Cruisers, destroyers, heavy carriers, each one radiating the unmistakable strength of the Deathworlder fleet. She had never been so grateful for those colors, those symbols, those familiar hull designs in her entire life. Rallan, still coughing from smoke, whispered, "They came." Mara, gripping a handrail in the lower corridor, let out a trembling breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Across every ship in the convoy, faces illuminated with fragile hope. The Deathworlder ships wasted no time. The lead battleship, DSS Manifold, surged forward like a burning spear. Its cannons fired a brilliant arc of blue plasma that tore straight through the first raider cruiser, slicing it in half. Explosions blossomed outward in slow, fiery petals. Pieces of shattered metal spun into the void. The raiders roared back with their own weapons, spraying the Deathworlder fleet with red bolts of chaotic energy. The Manifold's shields glowed brightly, absorbing the hits with almost contemptuous ease behind it. 2 destroyers broke formation and dove downward in perfect synchronization. They hammered the lower raider ships with successive torpedo waves. Each torpedo streaked across space like a bright star, slamming into raider hulls and sending fiery shockwaves spiraling outward on the escort ships. The crews could barely believe what they were seeing. One moment, they were preparing to die. The next, they were witnessing a full military strike, powerful enough to rewrite the entire battle within minutes. But the raiders were not about to run. Not yet. Their flagship, a massive ugly behemoth welded from stolen parts, charged straight at the Deathworlder fleet. Its engines burned blood red. Its hull bristled with spines and cannons. It unleashed a barrage so intense that sparks cascaded across the Manifold's shields like glowing rain. Inside the arc the lights flickered as the ship drifted powerless. The explosion from the flagship's attack made the convoy shake like leaves in a storm. Though the arc light was not targeted, the shockwaves rippled through every nearby vessel. Vance grabbed a railing, bracing herself. "Status." She shouted. "Still no engine power." Came the response. "Navigation is down. Shields are weakened. We're a sitting target." The Arclight could only watch the battle unfold. The raider boarding craft that had been preparing to cut into the Arclight tried to flee as the Deathworlder fleet advanced, but one of the destroyers swung toward them. Its cannons fired rapid bursts, clean, brilliant shots, each one hitting their mark with surgical precision. The raider craft erupted in small explosions, turning to metal shards that floated harmlessly away. Mara covered her mouth with her hands. "We're safe. We're actually safe." But the battle was far from over. The raider flagship kept firing, refusing to yield even as several of its escorts were reduced to drifting debris. Its cannons glowed brighter, focusing energy into a massive beam intended to split the manifold into two for a moment. It seemed like the beam might actually overwhelm the Deathworlder flagship's shields. The blue glow flickered, dimmed, and strained under the intensity, but then the Deathworlder carrier DSS Horizon arrived. Larger than all other ships combined, its presence was like a planet moving through the sky. Its engines glowed with deep white fire, and its hull was lined with thousands of small launch bays. Every single bay opened at once. A cloud of attack drones burst forth, glowing like a swarm of stars. They streaked toward the raider flagship with incredible speed, moving so quickly they left white trails in their wake. The swarm shifted like a living serpent, diving and weaving as the raiders fired wildly into the cloud. Then the drones struck. They surrounded the raider flagship, attaching magnetic charges across its hull. Thousands of tiny metallic clicks echoed through the comms as the charges locked into place. A moment later, boom, a chain of precise, controlled detonations tore across the raider flagship's surface. Not enough to destroy it outright, yet just enough to cripple its engines and destabilize its shields. The flagship lurched, veering sideways like a wounded animal. Inside the Ark, the crew erupted in cheers. But Captain Vance watched soberly. She knew the Deathworlders weren't going to show mercy. The manifold surged forward again, weapons glowing brighter than ever. It aimed directly at the raider flagship's weakened hull. The command voice echoed through Vance's comm. "Target locked. Delivering justice." A pulse cannon fired a massive sphere of compressed energy, shimmering like liquid lightning. It slammed into the raider flagship. The explosion was enormous, sending waves of light rippling through space. For the first time, the raiders faltered. Their formation broke. Their courage cracked. They began to retreat. But the Deathworlder fleet was not finished. The destroyers chased the fleeing ships, firing burst after burst. Some raider ships managed to escape into the darkness, engines burning desperately, but most were disabled, drifting into unconscious stillness. Their boarding craft were destroyed, their weapons silenced. On the Arclight, the trembling fear that had filled the ship slowly melted into relief. Crew members leaned against walls, collapsing into exhausted heaps. Some laughed, others cried. Mara sank to her knees, tears dripping onto the metal floor. "We made it," she whispered. "We actually made it." In the escort ships, the crews cheered loudly through damage and smoke. They had fought bravely, knowing they were outmatched. And now they watched the Deathworlder fleet finish the fight. They never could have won alone. Captain Vance finally contacted the manifold. "This is Captain Lyra Vance of the Arclight," she said. Her voice trembled, just slightly. "Our systems are damaged. We have injured crew. We thank you. You saved us." A calm voice replied, filled with firm reassurance. "Your SOS reached us. That was all we needed. Hold position. Rescue teams are on their way." Soon, small transport craft launched from the Deathworlder ships, carrying medics, repair engineers, and tactical personnel. They moved from ship to ship, offering aid, stabilizing hulls, and escorting wounded crew. When they boarded the Arclight, Captain Vance met them at the airlock. Her uniform was torn, her hair was coated with dust, and her face showed more exhaustion than she had ever admitted before. And yet, she stood tall, welcoming the rescuers with deep gratitude. The medics rushed through the corridors, tending to burns, smoke inhalation, and injuries caused during the overload. Engineers worked tirelessly to restore the Arclight's engines and stabilize its power grid. In every corner of the ship, people felt a sense of safety they had nearly forgotten. Outside, the battlefield drifted quietly, lit by the fading glow of destroyed raider ships and the steady presence of the Deathworlder fleet. The once terrifying raider circle was gone, broken and scattered like ashes in the wind. Hours passed, and slowly, the convoy began to breathe again. For the first time in what felt like days, Captain Vance allowed herself to sit. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes closed. She whispered a quiet thank you to fate, to her crew, and to the fleet that had answered their desperate call. Across the ships, crew members slept, cried, hugged one another, or stared silently out the windows at the massive Deathworlder warships guarding them. The nightmare was over, the convoy was safe, and the Deathworlder fleet stood watch over them like unbreakable giants, making sure no raider, no threat, ever dared come near them again. When the last fires in space finally faded and the darkness returned to its calm stillness, the convoy realized that something inside them had changed forever. The danger was gone, the raiders defeated, and the Deathworlder fleet remained beside them like silent guardians. But the memories of the attack, the fear they had felt, and the hope that had risen at the final moment, all of it stayed heavy inside their hearts. The Arclight drifted slowly, still under repair, surrounded by support craft. Its hull was scorched in places, chipped in others, but it remained whole, standing as proof that they had survived something they were never meant to survive. Crew members who had been trembling with terror only hours earlier now walked with slow, tired steps, their bodies safe but their minds still replaying the battle. Captain Vance moved along the main corridor, watching her crew with quiet eyes. Some sat on the floor with their backs against the wall, breathing quietly, trying to calm the storms inside their minds. Others whispered to each other, voices soft, as if afraid that speaking too loudly would bring danger back. A few tried to laugh, but their laughter carried a shaky edge. Surviving such a nightmare brought relief, but relief mixed with the shock of how close they had come to losing everything. Yet through all of this, there was a deep feeling of gratitude. Gratitude so powerful it almost felt like pain in their chests. Again and again, crew members repeated one sentence, as though speaking it helped them believe it. They came for us. Those 4 words traveled through the arclight like a kind of healing warmth. They reminded everyone that even in the empty silence of space, they were not alone. Even when they believed no one would hear them, their SOS had traveled across light years and awakened an entire fleet. Mara spent a long time sitting near one of the observation windows. She stared out at the massive silhouettes of the Deathworlder warships, their hulls shining softly in the distant starlight. She remembered how hopeless she had felt, crouched in the dark hallway with smoke choking the air and explosions shaking the walls. The fear had been so real that she could still feel its echo inside her chest. But now, those same stars that had once felt cold and empty now seemed warm, safe, friendly, almost as if they were smiling at her. For Rallan, the aftermath was even heavier. He sat in the medbay with a bandage across his forehead, replaying the moment he had forced the SOS through the damaged transmitter. He had been seconds away from collapsing, and he still didn't understand how he had managed to finish the message. It felt like something beyond strength, something born from pure desperation and hope. The medic leaning his wounds spoke softly to him. "You did well. That message saved every person on this ship." Rallan did not answer immediately. He swallowed hard, staring down at his hands that had pressed buttons with shaking fingers. While death crept closer every second, he finally whispered, "I thought no one would hear it." But someone had heard. Someone had answered. Days passed slowly as the convoy recovered. The Deathworlder fleet stayed with them, standing guard while engineers repaired hull breaches, patched damaged circuits, and replaced overloaded reactors. The battlefield remained quiet, the wreckage of raider ships drifting like forgotten shadows. The Deathworlder drones occasionally crossed the area, scanning for any remaining threats. Conversations across the convoy shifted from fear to wonder. Some talked about how the Deathworlder ships had cut through the raiders like they were nothing. Others admired their formation, their discipline, their power. But most of all, they talked about the moment those ships had arrived, the brilliant flash of light, the wild hope, the feeling of being lifted from the edge of death. Captain Vance received a message from the commander of the Deathworlder fleet. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "Your convoy is safe now. We will escort you to the nearest secure outpost. No harm will reach you again." She listened quietly, then replied with heartfelt sincerity, "We owe you everything." "No," the commander answered. "You owe nothing. You called for help. That is reason enough." The simplicity of that answer stayed with her. It was not about debt or obligation. It was about responsibility, honor, and a promise to never abandon those in danger. When the time came for the convoy to move again, it felt like waking from a long dark nightmare. The engines of the arclight finally hummed back to life. Not as strong as before, but steady, dependable. The crew gathered at their stations, still tired but no longer afraid. They were protected, they were watched over, and most importantly, they were alive as the ships began to travel toward the outpost. The Deathworlder fleet surrounded them like an armored shield. Large vessels took the front, smaller ones guarded the sides, and drones flew above and below, forming a living corridor of safety. The convoy felt almost like royalty being escorted through the stars. Mara stood again at the observation window, watching the formation move with graceful precision. She whispered quietly, "It's beautiful." And it was. It was the kind of sight that left a mark on a person's soul, something they would remember for the rest of their life during the journey. The Arclight's crew slowly returned to their routines. Engineers repaired damaged panels. Officers updated logs. Medics checked on the injured. But everything felt different now. Every sound seemed softer. Every breath felt easier. There was no tension in their shoulders, no fear behind their eyes. There was only peace. When the convoy finally reached the secure outpost, they were greeted like returning heroes. Rescue teams rushed toward them, offering fresh supplies, medical support, and safe docking bays. People cheered the moment the Arclight arrived, for news of the battle had already spread. Everyone knew how close they had come to destruction, and how miraculous their survival truly was. Captain Vance stood on the docking ramp, watching her crew finally step onto solid ground again. Some cried tears of relief. Some hugged one another tightly. Some simply stood still, letting the reality sink in. She breathed in the warm air of the outpost and closed her eyes. They had made it. Later, When she met with the Deathworlder commander face to face, she shook his hand firmly. He was taller than she expected, with calm eyes that held the weight of countless battles. "You saved us," she said again, this time with a steadier voice. He shook his head. "Your courage saved you. We only answered your call." There was something humble in his words, something powerful. It reminded Vance that even the strongest forces in the galaxy could show kindness. Before departing, the convoy gathered on a large platform overlooking the hangar. They watched as the Deathworlder fleet prepared to leave, engines glowing faintly like drifting lanterns. No one wanted them to go, but everyone understood that they had other duties, other people to protect, other crises waiting somewhere in the vast darkness. As the fleet rose into the sky, Mara wiped tears from her eyes. Rallan stood beside her, shoulders finally relaxed. The crew watched silently, feeling both gratitude and awe. The last ship disappeared into the stars, leaving behind only a soft shimmer of light, but the sense of safety remained. For a long time, people would speak of that day, where they would talk about the moment an SOS broke across the void and turned into a beacon bright enough to awaken the fury of an entire Deathworlder fleet. They would remember the fear, the hope, the arrival, and the victory. And for those who had lived through it, the crew of the Arclight, the escorts, the passengers, it became more than a story. It became a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, even when death seemed seconds away, someone, somewhere would always come. The convoy rebuilt their ships, they healed their wounds, they continued their journey through the galaxy, but they did so with new strength in their hearts, because they had seen what true power looked like, because they had felt what true protection felt like, because they had learned that courage could survive even in the coldest space, and because they knew, without any doubt, that if ever again they were lost, frightened, or alone, their voices would not vanish into the void. Someone would hear them, someone would come, and the stars, once dark and distant, would burn bright with hope again.